Well, we're joined by someone who might be familiar to you, the newsagent's co-host, former policy editor of the BBC's Newsnight, Lewis Goodall. I should also say that we actually used to work together as well, full disclosure.
I was going to say, Sophie, more importantly, former political correspondent of Sky News.
Of this parish.
Indeed so. That's what people still say to me. Rightly so.
Yeah, too right.
Yeah,
I like that.
Absolutely.
So what's your take? You worked at the BBC, right? You worked at Newsnight. You're not someone who shies away from giving an opinion. Is the BBC biased?
I don't think it is biased in a way that it is being alleged to be biased. I.e., the whole point of the Prescott dossier was to say that the BBC is institutionally biased in different directions to which he points, sort of against Trump and on a suite of other measures. Now, of course, you will always be able, in an organisation like the BBC, an organisation like Sky, an organisation that, Sophie, any sort of big journalistic organisation, the sorts that we've worked for, you're always going to be able to point to individual items, individual programmes, individual things that are said and said, could that have been better? That is a different question to the idea of institutional bias. And I have to say that on the dossier that this gentleman, Michael Prescott, who's going to be at the Select Committee later today, in terms of the issues that he points to, even within the things that he has said, there isn't that much evidence to suggest that there is systemic bias on those questions, although it is true to say that on any individual matter or individual subjects, there will, of course, be mistakes, and sometimes you just don't meet the standards that you would like to meet in any given day, on any given day, in any given event.
In a lot of the Prescott report, the conclusion was that there was a liberal bias in the BBC. And I asked this, in the kind of most respectful way. Do you think that the reason you don't think the BBC is biased is because you share the liberal bias of the BBC?
No, because you and I both know, Sophie, that when you do jobs like this and you go into broadcast jobs, just as in there are a whole suite of different jobs in professions all over the country, none of us are impartial. You're not impartial, I'm not impartial. We're not impartial people. There is no such thing as that, particularly if you're interested, like you and I am, in political journalism. It would be very, very odd if you had no views or no politics. I don't, you don't. We both have those things. But you can also do something, which is when you go and do jobs like this, you put a hat on, you say, yes, I've got those views, but I am going to be in a position where I am going to look at any particular subjects with impartiality and with accuracy and as a journalist. Now, my question is this. Many of those same people, some of whom we're going to hear from at the Select Committee later on today, they too have politics. They too have partiality. And my point, and I know that this is the case for many people in the BBC as well, is that they do not themselves ask themselves the sorts of searching questions about their own biases and their own prejudices that they are all too willing to ask of other people.
Do you want to expand on that at all?
Well, I mean, in a sense that, look at the Prescott dossier itself. It has a whole suite of complaints about the BBC's coverage of Gaza, about the BBC's coverage of Trump, and a whole array of other things. I would have a lot more time for that dossier and some of the people on the board who are prosecuting these questions and allegations of bias if that dossier included the suite of other accusations about bias on other things in other direction. I note, for example, that there is nothing in that dossier about the accusations of over-representation of Reform or under-representation of the Green Party or over-attachment to economic coverage of economics, which is attached to old economic orthodoxies and old ideas or ideas around immigration and so on. So if that dossier had come along and said, look, I have looked across the whole suite of complaints from left to right, from liberal to conservative, I would think fair enough. But it just so happens, curiously enough, to contain the bugbears and obsessions and culture war interests of the people on the board, and perhaps Prescott himself, and their interests, their biases, their prejudices, their concerns. And you can't approach impartiality like that. If you look at impartiality, you've got to look across the suite and across the table.
Do you think the board's fit for purpose?
Not in the way that it's currently constituted, no, I don't. And I don't think you should be having political appointments to the BBC. And I don't think, I mean, look, clearly, Sophie, there is a crisis of governance at the BBC at the moment. We saw a resignation just on Friday of a lesser-known member of the board because it seems he himself was citing sort of governance concerns. One of the reasons that this crisis exploded, right, is because that board could not agree a common position and response to the Panorama edit. Now, we can have a big discussion about how grave or serious the Panorama edit was and so on. But it's clear that a board which was functioning correctly and functioning properly should be able to come to a common position. And the fact that they were not able to do so, and that vacuum that then exists was filled by all of the politics and the White House getting involved and so on, which made this crisis 10 times worse for the BBC than it needed to be. So one of the things clearly that Samir Shah, the chairman, is going to have to answer later on today is exactly what's going on with the board, and as you say, whether it needs to be reconstituted in some way. Although, to be fair to the BBC, I mean, God, it's reconstituted every sort of few years, right? I mean, it used to be BBC Board of Governors, then the BBC Trust, now the board.
You mentioned Samir Shah there. Is he in trouble, the chairman?
I think he is in trouble for that reason, which is that he has been unable. Look, one of the jobs of the chair, right, of any organisation, is to try and reach some consensus and to ensure that if there isn't consensus, that does not lead to torpor, that it does not lead to reputational problems for the BBC. He's been unable to do that. Now, I think there are some reasons for that, but he's clearly going to have to account for this extraordinary series of events which have taken place over the last month.
So this is your big job pitch then for the BBC, I guess?
I think you're going to get the call before I will, Sophie, to be perfectly honest. I'm more likely to end up sitting next to Wilf, I think, than...
You'd be most welcome. I love that.
DG. Fabulous.
Yeah. The runners and riders for the DG is probably more of a Westminster journalism insider bubble.
Go on, I'll ask. What do you reckon then?
What?
Who should it be?
What? If not Sophie?
Yeah, not here. The director general.
I know you've just got going and you can't lose your star tone.
I don't want it to be
lost. I know you'd be lost.
She's got to stay here.
Well, look, the weird thing is, right, is that this used to be a job, DG, as we know, right? It would be so coveted. You'd have a list that's as sort of long as your arm of people who would be, chasing to get this job. What's weird, and it just shows how basically almost ungovernable the BBC's become and how difficult these jobs are, is that actually all of the people who you might think are rushing to rule themselves out rather than get in. So, you've got to hope. That's what I'm saying, Sophie.
Yeah.
Are you going to rule it out now?
I can rule it out, yeah.
See, that's
Sorry.
What I mean. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Another one bites the dust.
Thanks, Lewis.
Thanks.